Okay, I'm going to be talking about the right time and the wrong time to call into medical offices, to call prospective clients. Now, it's important to know that each type of specialty, whether it's cardiology, psychiatry, internal medicine, orthopedics, dermatology, you name it, they all have their own sort of personality. And with that also comes a physician that is attracted to that particular specialty because of their own personality and their own desires and needs. For instance, you might find that physicians that go into dermatology are very different than those that go into cardiology. Dermatologists, a lot of times, are focused on generating income. Orthopedics, a lot of times those are jocks. They're ex-jocks that go into becoming a surgical physician to operate on knees and joints and hips and all of that good stuff. And then you have psychiatrists, and psychiatrists have their own personality. A lot of times they're drawn to psychiatry for their own reasons and because it's something that fascinates them and they find self-help from that. So it's important to really understand a little bit more about each specialty and the personalities of each of the physicians that are drawn to the specialties in which they're working. So again, going back to what's the right time to call into these offices? Well, it all depends. It depends on the specialty. For instance, a bad time to call into any office is probably Monday morning, from 8:30 until, I don't know, 11 o'clock. That's probably a bad time to call into any type of office, no matter what. So that's a very general statement, but it's pretty true. And the reason why is because a lot of times patients build up over the weekend. And come Monday morning, any practice, doesn't matter what specialty is generally slammed with people that were already scheduled on that Monday, as well as people that need to be seen immediately that are squeezed into that schedule on that Monday. So Mondays are really just not a good idea. It's good and best to try and do some different activity on a Monday morning. When it comes to an orthopedist, for instance, a lot of times they do their surgeries very early in the morning or they have very specific surgical times. So, it depends. You may want to call into an office midday. Now, while we're on the subject of midday, I should say that it's also pretty standard practice for a practice to shut down their phones exactly at 12 o'clock or a couple minutes before 12 o'clock because it'll go right into voicemail or to their service. And then they will generally pick back up about 1 o'clock. So you can pretty much guarantee that you will not be making calls, A, on a Monday morning, and B, any given day, generally from 12 until 1 or whenever they take their lunch, might be 1 to 2, whatever. So those are two specific times that I would stay away from. One time that has been very successful for me is to call later in the day. It seems that later in the day, these practices, they're sort of worn down, their guard isn't as up as much. They've been, just listened to patients all day and gotten calls and their guard is a little bit, down. So I've had success, strangely enough, later in the day and on a Friday, later in the day, but generally Fridays in general. So, so that is a time where I would consider calling into offices. But take an example of psychiatric offices. Now, these are offices that, in many cases, aren't manned by an administrative assistant. It depends on the setup of the practice, but a lot of times you will find that you'll have to go directly into the voicemail of one of these psychiatrists or a nurse practitioner, physician assistant, generally a nurse practitioner that works with a psychiatric office, or their administrative assistant who for some reason just doesn't pick up right when you call. So that is something that I find pretty standard from practice to practice. You may find a situation where, and these do exist, where a psychiatric office has many different psychiatrists that work for them as well as nurse practitioners, licensed social workers, so on and so forth, therapists that they need someone full time and therefore they're going to answer their phones just like any other internal med office or family practice, primary care, what have you. You take a practice like pediatrics. Generally that's a pretty upbeat sort of practice, and when you're calling into any of these offices, you have to slightly adjust your tone and take on just a bit of a different tone, whether it's a pediatric group or a psychiatric group. Psychiatric, is very like straightforward, state your business, here we go. Um, you know, Orthopedics, if you're a very sociable person, you might find that that might be a good approach for that office. Um, Dermatology, you might be focusing on why this is going to save you money and be a best use of your resources to work with diagnostics. So again, you have to evaluate the personality of a practice when it comes into when you should be calling the practice and how you call into the practice.